This meeting of the Arizona Independent Redistricting Commission will now come to order. The time is 12:05 p.m. despite what the clock on the wall says. It's 103 degrees, and let's all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. It's great to see so many of the public here today, and I'd like to remind anyone who would like to speak to fill out a request to speak form in the back and give that to our Executive Director, Ray Bladine. And I have a few so far, and there's still time to do that, so feel free. Let's have roll call. Vice Chair Freeman.
Here.
Vice Chair Herrera.
Here.
Commissioner McNulty. Here. Commissioner Sturts.
Here.
We have a quorum. I'd also like to acknowledge our legal counsel today, Joe Canefield, and our Executive Director, Ray Bladine. And we have a court reporter today, Marty, who's going to be taking an accurate record of things, so I'd like to remind everyone to speak one at a time so that he can hear what we're saying. I think that takes us to item 2 on the agenda, which is the call for public comment. We've got a handful so far, and you can still feel free to fill out a request to speak form and give it to Ray. But we'll go ahead and get started with this. I'd like to ask the people speaking if they could limit their comments to 5 minutes today. That would really be helpful in terms of time. Our first speaker is actually a distinguished guest, Mr. Steve Lynn, who is the former chair of the IRC. He's representing himself, and he'd like to talk about the consultant selection and other. Steve.
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, good afternoon. I will certainly do my best to keep my comments to 5 minutes. However, I did prepare some remarks, and I'll try to go through them as quickly as I can. As I indicated, my name is Steve Lynn, and I am the former chair of the Commission until the first of you was selected. I spent 10 years doing what you're doing. And in that capacity, I come before you today particularly to address some comments that were made last meeting by a colleague of mine, Andy Minkoff. When the new commission was impaneled, I decided very early on that I would not be a part of the process. I didn't think that was appropriate. I didn't think it was appropriate for old dogs to teach new dogs any tricks unless the new dogs asked. And so I come here today not in that capacity to try to teach you anything, but rather I come to respond to some comments that were made last time. And it is very difficult for me to do this because I think retired commissioners should stay retired. That's my point. So you have long fought for discretion as a commission. You can do a lot of things any way you want to do them. And with that discretion comes an awful lot of responsibility. The discretion is quite broad, but so is the responsibility that goes with it. And the responsibility is to make sure that there are no abuses of discretion and no unwise or excessive exercise of the power that you have under the Constitution. But Ms. Minkoff's comments of the last meeting cannot and should not go unchallenged. Let me be clear. I am not here today to promote or support any one of the candidates to be your mapping consultant. I am simply here today to clear up some misconceptions based on her comments at the last meeting. While Ms. Minkoff is entitled to her own opinion, and certainly I have heard her opinions for almost 10 years, she is not entitled to her own set of facts. And so I take issue with many of her statements to you last week as being untrue, inaccurate, misleading, defamatory, and in some cases just preposterous. In her zeal to discredit one of your applicants, Ms. Minkoff would have you believe that that applicant manipulated the mapping process throughout the work that we did as a commission, and that that applicant infused their bias into the maps that were drawn. I would simply remind the commission that our mapping consultants only drew maps at our direction, including the now famous Hall-Minkoff plan, favored by Ms. Minkoff and the plaintiffs in the 5-year legal battle that we fought. That map, NDC drew, like every other map they drew, at our direction and our agreement. In fact, NDC drew every map and every test that we ever considered as a commission, the ones we adopted and the ones we rejected, like the Hall-Minkoff plan, or the congressional map that Ms. Minkoff, along with the other members of the commission, voted in favor of. And were there bias in that map, she certainly would have voted against it as well, as she did with the legislative map. And if you think about it, the stakes are much higher on a congressional map than they would be on a legislative map. So if you had an agenda, you certainly would do something to bias the congressional map as well. Now, if I sound incredulous, it is because I am. I am saddened and embarrassed by these unfortunate and untrue comments that have been made as a part of your record. And I can assure you that the other members of the commission did not feel manipulated by NDC and have never expressed anything but high regard for their work. As she indicated to you, Ms. Minkoff felt so badly served by NDC that she went out of her way to send a letter to the California IRC urging them not to engage NDC as their mapping consultant. What she didn't tell you was that two other members of the former commission, my commission, also sent letters to the California Commission urging just the opposite. And let me share with you some comments from those letters. Jim Huntwork, a Republican member of the commission, wrote as follows, quote, "One of the first and in retrospect one of the best decisions made by our commission was to hire Douglas Johnson and his colleagues at National Demographics Corporation as our primary consultants. I have never had the opportunity to work with a more highly qualified, hardworking, dedicated, professional, and classy individual or group than Mr. Johnson and the associates at NDC," unquote. And lest you think that because of the bias inferred that that's what the Republicans thought and the Democrats felt differently, Joshua Hall, a Democratic member of the commission, wrote as follows, quote, "Doug Johnson and his staff were absolutely outstanding. They were always very responsive to whatever requests we made. Their desire was to always serve us. Throughout the process, Doug was impartial and unbiased. He never seemed to have an agenda other than to make us happy. His demeanor and actions were always polite, courteous, professional, and productive. When it came to the nuts and bolts of redistricting, Doug's technical knowledge and expertise were without match. When comparing the analysis completed by Doug and his staff to that of other consultants representing special interests, the difference was often dramatic in the level of depth and detail. In addition to his technical expertise, Doug has a keen sense of how to help navigate the complexities of the process. He understands redistricting better than any person I know. He has a unique ability to synthesize that which is very complicated and make it very understandable for the public. He frequently would do so," unquote. So it isn't a matter of Republicans or Democrats feeling that NDC did a good job. It is, in fact, a consensus of everyone apparently other than Ms. Minkoff. Now, I'm not going to go into all of the detail of things that she told you that weren't quite accurate, but I will tell you that if you review the record, there are several, and I mean several inaccuracies that were a part of her statements. Let me sum up my discussion of Ms. Minkoff's unfortunate comments by saying that her opinions are not held by anyone else ever associated with the commission, its staff, or consultants. And since I have the floor, Madam Chair, and I understand I'm abusing the time limit, and I apologize for that, but after 10 years, give me some discretion.
Granted.
I am grateful for the indulgence of the time, and I would be remiss if I did not also comment on what appears to be this commission's desire to reject any association with the former IRC. Now, that's an opinion, and I'm entitled to that. Legal counsel, consultants, first and foremost, let me tell you that the discretion that has been long fought for is absolutely yours, and you are entitled, perfectly within your rights, to reject any or all association with anything that happened in the last 10 years. The question is it wise to do so? We have been roundly criticized for not creating a sufficient number, whatever that means, of competitive districts. And the number that is thrown around is 4, that the final maps that we produced, the legislative map in particular, had 4 competitive districts. Well, if you use the narrowest definition and the most conservative methodology of determining competitiveness, the answer is 4. By Judge-It, that statistical analysis that we employed as a commission, there were only 4 competitive districts in the legislative map prior to the map going into effect. However, an honest review of the effectiveness of the districts as they performed over the last decade will show you that at minimum 7 and generally 9 of the districts performed in a competitive manner. That is to say that over the last 10 years, those 9 districts produced legislative representatives for the state from both political parties over that period of time. And just for the record, you can check districts 5, 10, 11, 17, 20, 23, 24, 25, and 26. Check the record for the last 10 years and you will see that they have represented both parties in the state legislature. So, when the inevitable challenge comes in court, and it will come, I hope that you are well served by your consultants as we were by ours. Remember, our maps were used for the last decade, and we drew every one of them. No court, no special master, no third party drew maps for us. Our maps were the ones that were used, and that was our first and most important criteria, with the exception of upholding the Constitution and the laws of Arizona. And I hope you remember the words of the philosopher George Santayana, who in a volume entitled Reason and Common Sense, Volume 1, said, quote, "Those who cannot remember the past are doomed to repeat it," unquote. I don't want you to repeat 5.5 years of litigation. No one should have to do that. Madam Chair, members of the Commission, I thank you for your time. I hope this is the last opportunity that I or any member of the former Commission will have to address you on the issue of consultants or anything else of substance unless you ask us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lynn. You're welcome to come anytime.
Thank you.
Okay, the next speaker slip I have. Marilyn Rigo, representing Sun City Club. The subject is azredistricting.com.
Madam Chair and Commission, I am Marilyn Rigo of the Sun City Club, and I've been following these proceedings based on the posted minutes and videos, and it appears that the Commission has already made a very partisan decision on the selection of the attorneys. I hope the choice of the Commission today for a mapping company who will collect and give information back to the Commission from the public will be a choice that is obviously beyond reproach. Surely one of these 4 companies comes into the process without an agenda. If that is the case, then the Commission should choose that company so the public can have confidence that the public voice will be fairly represented. That is the very least that the Commission can do. On the agenda today, there is a group that appears to be getting preferential treatment already. This group supposedly represents the general public, but on a closer inspection is linked to progressive liberals and progressive liberal organizations, and that group is azredistricting.com. There have already been groups coming forward with maps that have been drawn, but they also have been able to present their maps for a few minutes as the public input part of the meeting. For a group like azredistricting.com to be given special treatment by the Commission shows that they had political connections and are not a neutral group. Or can any group ask the Commission to present their maps in a separate presentation? The entire purpose of having a commission, which is spending huge taxpayer money, was so there could be confidence that the process is fair. If the group of citizens is given preferential treatment over other groups, is that fair? Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Jerry Ottoboni, representing PTOT, I think, P-E-T-O-T, and if I'm incorrect, you can correct me, Jerry, and the subject is mapping companies.
Yes, Commissioner. Excuse me. Strategic telemetry and research advisory systems should be disqualified from consideration because of their obvious conflict of interest issues. Strategic telemetry, with its president, Ken Strasma, being Obama's 2008 National Director for Targeting is sort of like Chicago politics coming to Arizona. Even Strassman's response to the commissioner's questions of how he would respond to those concerned about his perceived bias was right out of Obama's playbook, namely his transparency and meticulous documentation as how he would dispel the bias accusations. Research Advisory System, Tony Sessions, has troubling association with the SEIU. But another huge red flag was his definition of communities of interest. According to his definition, the Hopi Nation would not be considered a community of interest because it's too big geographically. The largest community of interest that he thought would be acceptable was a neighborhood watch. That would be covering a few little streets. His explanation was equally revealing of the political bias, stating that the term communities of interest as a code for safe districts. This is simply not true, as can be seen by the example of the Hopi Nation and other groups like ranchers. Citizens felt the competitive district should be much more important because the problem with communities of interest, but competitive districts must play a lesser role according to the Redistricting Commission's own RFP, as well as the state Supreme Court. 2.2.6, to the extent practicable, competitive districts should be favored, where to do so would be would create no significant detriment to the other goals. One has to wonder how either of these companies made it into the final consideration. But Terra Systems does not seem to have any baggage. They are an Arizona company, and so the money will stay in the state. And they were the only company that came up with a process to get the public involved. We also like the response to the role the mapping company should take in developing the maps. Terra Systems said that the data and the public need to drive the process, not the mapping company. Now that really makes sense with no agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Gary Gomez, representing SELF, and the subject is mapping consultants.
My glasses on. It's an age thing. Madam Chairman, Commissioners, my name is Gary Gomez. I'm a citizen, a concerned citizen. I attended your meeting last Friday and listened to all the proposed mapping consultants' presentations. Redistricting is a daunting task, and I do not envy you your mission. The many laws, mandates, and court decisions often create roadblocks to common sense solutions. As was pointed out Friday, the population distribution in Arizona is also challenging. I learned much about the proposed process. Your own outline, the RFP, lays out much of the restrictions on the bidders for the mapping consultant. One part of your RFP states that the offerer shall have no personal, family, or financial relationships or commitments that a reasonable person would consider likely to improperly influence someone making a redistricting decision. No matter what each consultant says, none of them can absolutely keep from making mapping decisions that will affect the resulting maps. If they start with assumptions and preferences that are in conflict with your own RFP and or have financial ties to one party or the other, they should not be considered. First, strategic telemetry should not be considered. Simply, they do not pass the smell test. How can they be impartial if nearly 100% of their clients have and continue to represent Democrats? These, by their own admission, include the Obama campaign, the DNC, labor unions, the Kerry for President campaign. As one public speaker pointed out after the session, they are currently aiding Democrats in Wisconsin on the recall efforts against Republicans. Does it not give you pause that they mentioned no Republican clients in their presentation? They admitted most of their firm are Democrats. I would also strongly remind you that they will, by their own words, take most of the money out of the state. They will do their mapping behind closed doors in Washington, D.C. and New York. They also have not begun loading data in their database as the other firms. This could affect your schedule. Last, they know nothing about Arizona. They admitted this. and as I've said, would take the money out of the state. Second, Research Advisory Services is strongly committed to the concept of competitive districts. As you are aware and stated in the RFP, competitive districts should be favored, where to do so would create no significant detriment to other goals. In other words, competitive districts are considered after all the other criteria goals are met. Last, though they lean Democratic, and Mr. Sessions admitting he was progressive, they are an Arizona company and would keep the money mostly in Arizona. But I found it troubling when he spoke of ideology like it was the primary focus of communities of interest. To me, and I'm just a layman, communities are people, culture, commerce, religion, and lifestyle. They are more than their voting history. If I had a vote, it would be to keep the money in Arizona. I was impressed with Terra Systems, their presentation, their lack of agenda, and I felt their lack of experience with statewide redistricting to be an asset. They had the best proposal for public input through social media, the web, the cloud, Android apps, in any way that a person wanted to send input, including hand-drawn maps and snail mail. They were the only firm that had a public relations firm on board to help get public input. They were the only firm that proposed a manual to help citizens and citizen groups with their input. I liked what they said. The data should drive the process, the public should drive the process, and the commission should drive the process. They also know our state. Let's keep the money in Arizona. Please focus on more than the letter of the law. Keep in mind the intent of the law. Thank you.
Our next speaker, John Gallagher, representing SELF, on the subject is importance of competitive districts.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner, members of the Commission. I probably don't need to explain to any of you the importance of competitive districts. When I got here a little bit early today, and I took a quick tour through the old Capitol Museum, and I saw an exhibit by the Secretary of State's office proclaiming your vote counts. Well, the sad thing is that for many Arizonans, their vote doesn't count because they live in lopsided districts where the result of the election is determined in the primary. And if you belong to the wrong party in one of those districts, your vote actually doesn't count. So it is important that people retain faith in our political system, and I'm afraid a lot of people are losing that faith. A lot of people don't bother to vote because they tell me there's nobody to vote for. And we need to change that. We need to give people a choice and that they just don't have right now. The alternative is more recalls, more initiatives, more attempts of citizens to take government into their own hands if government doesn't represent them. And I've heard it alleged that the last mapping consultant treated competitiveness as an afterthought. We can't allow that to happen again, if that's true, and I'm not sure that it is. But if they treated competitiveness as an afterthought, they didn't weight it equally with the other criterion that the courts have told us we must do, then that consultant shouldn't be given another chance. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. Our next speaker, Renee Gillen. You can correct my pronunciation. Legislative assistant representing League of Arizona Cities and Towns, and the subject is outreach.
Madam Chair and Commissioners, good afternoon. My name is Renee Guillen.
Guillen.
Don't worry, it's pronounced no way like it's spelled.
Thank you.
But hopefully I will be the most boring presenter here during the public comment period. And I've actually already met with the staff behind the scenes, and I just wanted to formally introduce myself to the Commission and to just let you know that we are available not on any sort of opinion or agenda, but actually just as you do your outreach to get out to the state, to take feedback and look at maps and tour the state. We just wanted to let you know that we can be a resource to help you get in contact with some of the 91 municipalities across the state. If you're looking for locations to host meetings, I know we've spoken that you have an interest in using higher education facilities because of their technological capabilities. Well, many cities and towns stream their council meetings and they record them, they put those on the web, so they're already sort of pre-wired, hopefully to meet some of your needs. And so We've actually received some positive feedback, active feedback from Chandler, Avondale, Prescott Valley, and in particular Flagstaff, and their willingness to host the commission and help them in their duties. So I just wanted to formally introduce myself and say, you know, we're here, we have contacts. I know you guys already met in Oro Valley, and so we're thankful that they were willing to accommodate you, and we just look to help you in the future.
And thank you for facilitating that meeting, too. Thanks. Our next speaker, Michael Liberti, an attorney with Fair Trust, and the subject is mapping consultant.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the Commission, legal counsel. I'll be brief. Thank you. Just want to reiterate what has been said before. The state constitution requires that this commission and the individual commissioners exercise impartiality and make decisions that uphold public integrity in this process. And that's very clearly spelled out in the Constitution. It's part of the legislative history. And if this commission and the commissioners decide to choose a mapping consultant that is closely aligned with one particular political party, this commission's ability to uphold that public confidence will be irreparably harmed. Thank you.
Thank you. And our last speaker for public comment is David Braun, representing Self, and the subject is 2001 redistricting experience.
Good morning.
Morning.
And good to be back in front of all of you. I have no dog in this fight in reference to who you're going to choose as your mapping consultant, but I did have some experience in the 2001 2009 redistricting litigation, and when I heard Mr. Lind speak a few minutes ago, I thought some of the factors that I observed might be of consideration for your commission when you make your decision in this matter. And the most obvious point I would make is that the Department of Justice rejected the very first set of maps that was prepared by the commission with apparently the help of NDC in their submission in 2002. I've yet to hear either from NDC or from the commission itself over the years as to exactly the history behind why that was rejected and how those decisions were made. The commission at the time apparently made a decision that they weren't going to allow themselves to be deposed and nor allow individual testimony from the commissioners that might have helped explain that variance. Apparently there was some deficiency in the initial presentation of the maps to DOJ, and while there may have been 4 competitive districts on the initial submission, there's no surprise in recognizing that in response to the DOJ rejection, the commission reworked its decision and in fact drafted what was regarded as 5 or 6 competitive districts by most observers. The second matter I've noticed, and I did look at a substantial portion of the lengthy meeting last time in reference to the different mapping companies that you're considering, and there was a certain amount of confusion concerning exactly what the goal of competitive districts is in relationship to the Constitution, the way it's drafted. And while the Constitution does appear on its straight language to present some issue as to whether competitive districts should be regarded as a lesser goal than the other 5 goals that the commission is obligated to consider. I think your legal counsel, Mr. Canfield, and a very quick review of the case law that the Arizona Supreme Court has said, especially the 2009 case, has made it absolutely explicit. These are 6 equal goals. You can consider them in any order that you want, but the value or the strength of each one is to be considered equal to the others in your consideration. And the Supreme Court has made that decision, and that's what we're all stuck with at this point as far as the interpretation of that section of the constitutional provision. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Braun. Unless there's anyone else who would like to speak, those are all the public comment sheets I have. I have one more. It's coming up. Thank you. Our next speaker is Vicki Davis, representing SELF and Citizens for Common Sense Redistricting. The subject is choice of mapping companies and complaint about disorganization.
Okay, I just got notification about this meeting yesterday with your email, and it said 1 o'clock. We've been traveling around trying to find where to park because there's no instructions. It seems like you just don't want us to participate. We need you to schedule some of these meetings so that ordinary citizens can get here in the evening after they work. So it just seems like I just don't trust that you're trying to involve the citizens very well, at least from my experience, what little bit I've found out so far. Also, I wonder on your final 4 choices that you're supposed to decide on today. 2 of the companies, one is based in Washington, D.C. Why on earth are we even considering someone from there? They've done a lot of DNC work. I don't understand that. Then Research Advisory Services evidently wants to make the first consideration competitive districts, which is just crazy. I don't even know who belongs to what in my own area. I don't determine where I live by that sort of stuff. I go by where I can shop, the views, the whatever, a lot of other reasons. My son works for Raytheon and he just finished building his home between Benson and St. David, and they do almost all their shopping in Tucson. We travel back and forth a lot. He says almost half the people that he knows in his area work in Tucson. So there's a real tight connection there as far as I'm concerned. So I just would wish that you'd make this a little bit more modern and schedule your meetings far enough ahead so us ordinary people can figure out how to get here. And number 2, that you figure out how to make it so that people could call in, or that we could see you on YouTube or something, so that it makes it more accessible to ordinary people. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak during public comment? Okay, hearing none, and we're through all the request to speak forms. We will move on to agenda item 3, which is discussion and consideration of confidential documents associated with the evaluation of responses to the mapping consultant RFP, and a review and ranking of submitted proposals after consideration of interviews. The Commission may take action to award a contract to a selected firm. The Commission may vote to go into executive session, which will not be open to the public, for the purpose of obtaining legal advice or reviewing confidential documents. Staff from the State Procurement Office will be present. And I would just like to say for everyone, because I know it's frustrating when you see the Commission go into executive session, and it seems like that's all we're doing is going into executive session or coming out of it. And I know I speak for all the commissioners on this. We would love to be conducting as much as we can in front of you. We view this as a very transparent process, and we want input. And unfortunately, I mean, fortunately and unfortunately, we chose a path because we didn't have our own procurement process set up. We decided to follow State Procurement Office's procurement process because they have a very solid one that's in place, and thought that that would be the most expedient way forward, frankly, is to use their process in terms of securing legal counsel and for these mapping consultants. So the way the process works, though, is those proposals that these firms submitted, first of all, the request for proposal that we all crafted had to be done in executive session and behind closed doors, because we didn't want to give advantage to everyone knowing exactly what we were providing. Everyone needed to know, get the same information at the same time. So during the crafting process, a lot of that was conducted in executive session. And then once the responses were submitted, they're all considered confidential until an award is made. And so that's why these proposals are still confidential. At some point, they're going to be, as soon as the award's made, they will be available for all of you to read on the internet. And I hope that a lot of you were able to watch either online or come to our meeting on Friday, where we did interview 4 of the firms in public session, because it's a really instructive thing to do for everybody, and I encourage all of you to go to our website, azredistricting.org, and click on the link, and you can watch the entire proceedings of those 4 firm interviews. And soon you'll be seeing the documents, the actual proposals that the 7 firms submitted to us. So that's all forthcoming, and I just apologize in advance, but that's the way the rules are. And so did any commissioners want to say anything on that, or any other thoughts or comments?
Madam Chair?
Mr. Sturts?
I wanted to make everyone aware that there is another hearing scheduled for tomorrow. If you are unaware of it, and I believe that we are live streaming today.
Yes, I believe so.
So anybody that is watching online would also be aware that there's a meeting tomorrow scheduled for 1 o'clock at the Pima Community College District Office at 4905 East Broadway Boulevard in Tucson in Building C, Room 105. And part of the agenda for tomorrow includes any carryover of any work that we're not completing today, but also includes a presentation by the mapping consultant and discussion and possible action on the presented information. So I want to make sure that the public was aware of that public meeting. It was posted, and if you have not had a chance to see it, you are now aware of it.
Thank you, Mr. Sturts. Any other comments or thoughts? You can ask questions too, I guess. Well, in order to proceed in terms of discussing our thoughts on these mapping consultants, do I hear a motion to go into executive session? Thank you. Is there a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, hearing none, we will enter executive session. The time is 12:43 p.m. Do we have space back here? Okay, great. So the public can stay in place. Okay, the time is 3:44 p.m. and we'll enter back into public session now. Thank you, public, for all of you being here. This is an impressive turnout, and our apologies for being so long in executive session. Joe, did you want to? Oh, I'm sorry, Joe's not ready yet. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to let the commission know that I've spoke with Jean Clark from the State Procurement Office. She's informed me that as the State Procurement Officer, she will be delegating her authority over the procurement of the mapping consultant to the commission in accordance with ARS 41-2512. So that means that the commission can proceed with the procurement selection on its own and can make its selection without having to go through the state procurement office.
Thank you, Joe. I'd first like to thank ADOA and State Procurement Office for, all of us would, frankly, for all they've done. They've been with us through every step of the process. Our commission happens to have the authority to hire anyone it wants on its own. And we chose to follow the State Procurement Office guidelines, as everyone knows. We talked about that earlier. And they've been wonderful to work with and have been with us every step of the way. This is a highly specialized and unique procurement or selection. And in this case, the commission felt it was best to go ahead and proceed on its own in making its selection. And to that end, did any commissioners have any thoughts or things they wanted to say? Okay.
Madam Chair?
Ms. McNulty?
I'm not sure if my microphone is working or not. I seem to have...
It is.
Thank you. My understanding, Mr. Canfield, please correct me if I'm incorrect, but in taking a delegation of the procurement authority, we would complete the procurement process. We would also be retaining our separate constitutional authority to make this hiring decision as a legislative body based on a majority of the 5 commissioners. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, Commissioner McNulty, that is correct.
Thank you for that clarification. Any other thoughts, comments? Hearing none, do we want to proceed with making our selection for the mapping consultant? Did anyone want to discuss anything now, or did anyone have any motions to proceed? I'm open either way.
Is giving me an expectant look. So I will begin with my thoughts. We have, I believe, as a group, learned a great deal from the 4 consultants who took the time to submit proposals that we ultimately interviewed. They This is a very complicated process, and it involves a lot of parts. We need to put together a lot of different pieces. My essential, the bottom line of my perspective on the proposals is that there was one proposal that got an A, one proposal that got a B+, and 2 proposals that were low C's or D's. And they were based solely on their responses to the request for proposals that we set out. We had a very detailed request for proposal that required them to respond to a lot of in great detail to different parts of the work that we needed. 3 of the firms responded in great detail and gave us step-by-step proposals about what they would do. One of the firms took a more generalized approach and talked about experience, but didn't give us the step-by-step detail about how they would address each of the issues that we raised. So that's my overview of the proposals.
Thanks for your thoughts. Other commissioners? Anyone want to say anything else?
Madam Chair?
Mr. Herrera?
No, works. No, I agree with Commissioner McNulty's comments. I think we learned a lot these past couple of months, especially going through the proposals in great detail, reading them over and over again, listening to their interviews. I learned a great deal a lot. I may apply 10 years from now as a mapping consultant. I hear it's a good gig. So, but they're all 4 good applicants, but some of them stood out more than others. I mean, but they all had their strong points and their weaknesses. But in the end, I think I ended up deciding based on the criteria that was set forth by SPO to evaluate them on methodology, on the capacity of offer, and the interview that we had with them. And I had 2 of them, in my opinion, that stood out greatly, and then 2 that were good, but not quite as good as the first 2 that I saw as my top 2. So, but it was a tough decision for me, and I'm sure it was a tough decision for the rest of you.
Thank you, Mr. Herrera. Other comments from other commissioners? Is there a motion to move forward with a given consultant, any of the 4 that we interviewed?
Madam Chair, I would move that we direct Mr. Bladeen to negotiate a contract for providing us with the mapping services with strategic telemetry. I would move that we direct our Executive Director, Ray Bladeen, to negotiate a contract to provide us with mapping services with strategic telemetry.
Is there a second?
I second that.
Any discussion?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Freeman?
Madam Chair, Strategic Telemetry submitted a comprehensive proposal in response to our RFP. And they had a good interview. Mr. Strassman and Mr. Dreschler made fine presentations last Friday. They both appeared personable, motivated to do this. And certainly their presentations just demonstrated a certain fund of knowledge and technical and otherwise related to the redistricting process. And I understand and appreciate the reasons that certain commissioners have for favoring that firm. I would also believe and certainly would hope that all commissioners would recognize and appreciate some justifiable concerns about the retention of that firm. These concerns are fairly patent in my book and infuse every aspect of their response to the RFP, but I'm not going to belabor them here. Rather, what I would rather do is put forward certain salient reasons why I favor the retention of National Demographics Corporation as the Commissioner's mapping consultant. I favor the Commission's retention of that firm, of NDC, and that's why I cannot support the retention of strategic telemetry. Foremost, in my view, NDC is unmatched in terms of its statewide redistricting experience and experience with Voting Rights Act compliance issues. NDC has undertaken statewide redistricting efforts in Mississippi, in Washington State, and in Arizona. NDC has undertaken redistricting efforts in numerous other counties and localities in Arizona, California, and numerous other places, including Clark County, Nevada. NDC is the only firm with statewide redistricting experience in Arizona and with an independent commission such as ours. NDC is familiar with the challenges we face and the types of decisions this commission must make and undertake in its proper, and understands very well its proper role as a mapping consultant. Indeed, what I was struck by during the interviews is, and one of the things that I respected in some of Mr. Strassman's responses to questions by commissioners was how they resembled, in some respects, the responses that Mr. Johnson gave us to similar questions on behalf of his company in DC. And that is to say, in particular, the proper role of the mapping consultant, which is to take our direction and to provide us with options and not to provide us with answers and not to lead us down any path toward any preferred answer. I also think NDC is unmatched really in terms of the experience and credentials of its key personnel. They are recognized redistricting experts in the country. They are looked to as national authorities. Mr. Johnson is asked to speak before the National Conference of State Legislatures in a nonpartisan capacity on voting and redistricting issues. I also think that NDC has a 32-year history that demonstrates that that demonstrates political balance and fairness. Those jurisdictions I mentioned, some of them you could characterize as Republican, some others as Democratic. They've done it all. They have a demonstrated history there. My sense is that going forward here today, strategic telemetry is going to be our mapping consultant, and I want to work with them and all the commissioners. And virtually all of our work is before us now. We have not drawn a single map, and that's really what we're here to do. And I hope to be able to work with confidence with strategic telemetry and my other fellow commissioners. And I hope that our vote here today does not serve as a further distraction for the commission going forward.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Sturts?
I as well will not be supporting this motion. National Demographics has been involved in the designing of state, county, and municipal districts across the country in various capacities for over 32 years. The work that National Demographics has done has had their significant experience in developing public outreach data. Focus group management is almost unmatched. The applicant is, National Demographics is also the only applicant that has, out of the applicants that we've interviewed, is the only one that has actually performed and prevailed successfully in multiple statewide redistricting applications with the Department of Justice pre-clearance process. The schedule that National Demographics put forward also put the Department of Justice submittal in late October and early November of 2011, which would allow the state to begin and the counties and the municipalities throughout the state to begin their work that happens after we get done. National Demographics has been involved in the political arena as it pertains to municipal mapping for the majority of the last 30+ years. Mr. Johnson, as well as his firm, are considered to be the national authority as it pertains to redistricting. And although Mr. Johnson's a fellow of the Rose Institute at Claremont College, it was my opinion, after review of careful documentation and researching this, that this relationship that he has, I find that it is neither a conflict of interest nor a detriment to Mr. Johnson's ability to perform under our request for proposal. And neither the Rose Institute nor Claremont College is a party to this application. As it pertains to strategic telemetry, frankly, I'm looking forward to working with Strategic as it appears as though they will be the selection that's going to be made today. In my opinion, Strategic was an applicant that did prepare a thorough and complete application and was a well-considered team at their interview. It's my opinion that I was both impressed by mostly by the applicant's willingness to defer the decision-making process to the commission. And it is going to be incumbent upon Strategic to live up to that willingness that was so forthrightly put forward, not only in his proposal, but in his interview. And I, for one, will be one that will be holding him accountable and their team accountable to making that happen. It is incumbent upon the 5 commissioners to direct the mapping consultants for their work, not the mapping consultants to direct the commission. So I'm looking forward to this vote, to move on with this process so that we can get on to the business at hand, which is recrafting the lines of the state of Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Sturts. Other discussion?
Madam Chair?
Mr. Herrera?
Yeah, for the record, I want to state that Research Advisory Services was my #1 choice. I thought their proposal was impeccable. Every RAS redistricting plan that has been pre-cleared by DOJ on the first submittal. I think their interview was top-notch. I think Mr. Sissons answered every question honestly and was very detailed. The proposed timeline was very realistic. You know, they proposed collaboration with the IRC's legal counsel. So every question we asked of RAS was answered well, even during a tough examination. So they would be my #1 choice. However, in the spirit of cooperation and negotiation, I'm willing to support strategic telemetry.
Thank you, Mr. Herrera. Any other comments, discussion?
Madam Chair, I'd like to talk a little bit about each of the candidates.
You better hold your mic.
I agree with what Mr. Herrera just said about research advisory services. I thought they did an extremely thoughtful and detailed proposal. They have experience in Arizona that's unmatched. And Mr. Sissons, I think, also understands the nuances of our particular situation in Arizona in a way that I don't think anyone else does. With regard to Terra Systems, I would like to say that their proposal was extremely well done, very detailed. If we didn't have the huge redistricting overlay here and needed a GIS firm, they would be the go-to firm. Unfortunately, we're private citizens and we're not redistricting experts, and we really need the experience that an experienced redistricting consultant can bring us. But I expect 10 years from now that Terra Systems is going to be sitting here with a lot more redistricting experience, and they're definitely going to be in the running. Mm-hmm. As to National Demographics Corporation, I had to make my decision based on the proposal that they submitted. And when I referred to a company that talked more about generalities than specifics, of course that's who I'm referring to. Their proposal relied very heavily on general statements about general self-praise, sort of, rather than telling us exactly how they were going to go about doing the work. And it was very important to me to have a consultant that could tell me in great detail what they were going to do to achieve each of the objectives. The training that they offered to us, in my view, was inadequate. The software that they proposed for us to use was not responsive to what we had requested. The detail that they provided about compiling and categorizing public input, even though that is clearly something that they're focused on and interested in, and I applaud them for that, the detail about the methodology of doing it wasn't as great as some of the other offerers. There was carelessness evident throughout their proposal, I felt, and their methodology just lacked clarity that some of the others had. As to strategic telemetry, you have to bear with me while I turn to my summary about that. Which is right here. I felt that their proposal was very responsive to what we had asked them to do. It was to the point, it was meticulous and thorough. As I said, they gave us a step-by-step description of the methodology for each question. They emphasized that they would give us the information and the know-how to make decisions for the state. They acknowledged that interpretation is our job and that they would not advocate for any position. They encouraged us and the public to present them with what-ifs in our public hearings so that they could show us different ways of going about this. They told us they would give us, as commissioners, a how-to guide in order to be able to access and better understand the database. They had excellent methodology for collecting, compiling, and categorizing the public input. They talked about how they would go about responding to public comments, not just gathering them. They stressed the importance of the public hearings and ensuring that the public had input and felt their concerns were being heard and addressed. They said they would collaborate with us, the IRC, with our staff and legal counsel, that they would be available to us 7 days a week. They had a very precise and detailed methodology for documenting the development of the map, including pros and cons for each decision, and how the 6 constitutional factors would be addressed with each decision. They would take hourly automatic snapshots of the maps as the maps were developed. They also had methodology for analyzing and using social media input. So their proposal didn't just say they would do it, they talked about exactly how they would do it. And they had very specific explanation of the security systems they would use. They had six experienced hands-on team members presented in their proposal, and they gave us a complete menu of technology options. They also made full disclosure of their the clients they'd worked for and their political contributions.
Thank you, Ms. McNulty. Any other comments?
Madam Chair.
Mr. Freeman?
None of the commissioners sitting here today have been elected by the people of this state. We've all been appointed. We've been appointed to exercise certain specific duties and responsibilities set forth in the Constitution. One of the very most important concerns involvement of the public in building public confidence in the process and the result. And certainly I would say that with respect to strategic telemetry, I do have concerns. I do think there are going to be concerns raised by the public. I hope that I am proven wrong. I hope that we have a transparent process, and I hope that none of us here are led to believe that any of the maps or options that are put before us have a specific result in mind. And I hope that for each of us as commissioners, and I hope that for the public as well, because that's one of our essential constitutional roles, is to build confidence with the public in the process.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Other comments?
Madam Chair?
Mr. Herrera?
You know, I would agree with Commissioner Freeman's comments. If we as commissioners didn't do our job, but we will be doing our job, and regardless of who's the mapping consultant, we'll be leading the process, and we'll make sure that the public at every meeting has input. They'll know what we're doing. So if it's strategic telemetry or RIS or NDC, I think the public should be assured that we are doing our jobs and that they have input. They can attend, all the meetings are open. If they can't attend in person, they can do it through not Skype, but whatever we're doing. And also during public comment. I mean, so I think the public should be assured that we are doing our job.
Thank you. Other comments? Then I guess we'll take the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
So for the record, Vice Chair Herrera, Commissioner McNulty, and I all voted aye. Vice Chair Freeman, Commissioner Sturts voted no. I would like to now make a statement myself. I hope you'll indulge me this. And I've listened to everyone, and I really appreciate everyone's comments just now.
Need batteries. If you don't mind.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's make sure this on. Yes, all right. My goals in chairing this commission are pretty straightforward. They are to comply with the Arizona Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, and the Voting Rights Act, and to achieve pre-clearance, ideally on our first try, from the Justice Department. I understand that there are partisan feelings and passions on all points on the political spectrum, and I'm sensitive to that. However, the proposition passed by the voters of the state of Arizona and now incorporated into our state constitution, has resulted in the chair of the IRC being an independent. Both times we've done this so far. As it happens, independents are the fastest growing bloc in the state. So it makes sense to have an independent voice on the commission, and I am the independent that my fellow commissioners, in their wisdom, however questionable in this case, unanimously chose. This puts me smack dab in the middle of all partisan disputes, and that is how Proposition 106 was designed. All I can do is honor my colleagues' choice by working as hard as I can, using my best judgment, listening to my conscience, and making what I believe are the best decisions for our commission and for the people of Arizona. We had only 7 responses to our mapping consultant request for proposal. From those initial 7, we chose to interview 4 firms. None of those firms is free from partisan connections. In fact, it seems it is in the very nature of this kind of technical work that over the course of a career, a firm has partisan affiliations themselves and is hired by partisans or partisan office holders to do the kind of work that they do. As in any kind of business, if you do a good job, you tend to get referrals and follow-up business from the people with whom you do business. Over time, a partisan pattern often develops. I think it's important to note that all of the mapping consultants we interviewed, whatever their partisan stripe, either personal or work-related, are first and foremost business people who are in business to earn a living and give the best possible service to their clients. From my own perspective as an independent, it might have been nice if we had had 4 firms that had only ever worked or been associated with independents, but apparently those firms don't exist, or they don't read requests for proposals which require summer work in the remote corners of Arizona. Who knows? But of the 4 firms we interviewed, there were 3 that, to varying degrees, appeared to have closer affiliations with Democrats, and 1 that appeared to have closer affiliations to Republicans. For the sake of fairness and balance, I would have preferred to have 2 of each, and I'm sure that having at least 2 options clearly perceived to be on the Republican side would have been the preference of our Republican commissioners. But that was not the result of our RFP response. In fact, only 1 perceived Republican-leaning firm even applied, and we had no control over that somewhat surprising result. So that was the hand we were dealt. It's very important at this point to note that we carefully considered many aspects of the firm's experience, capacity, and technical skill, and it's on these painstakingly developed criteria that our selection is based. But I know that, in the minds of some members of the public and press, the partisan connections are the main focus. To that end, of the 4 firms we interviewed, 2, though each had considerable experience, also had more strongly perceived direct political ties to and past involvement with our state. Understandably, the commissioners of the opposite party to those perceived ties had strong objections to each, and I had my own concerns. Of the 2 remaining, 1, while skilled and Arizona-based, lacked statewide redistricting and preclearance experience, which I viewed as absolutely essential. The other made a markedly stronger case than anyone else, instilled full confidence, and in my view, gave the best written proposal as well as interview. And that firm was Strategic Telemetry. It is true that Strategic Telemetry's principal, Ken Strasma, has done the bulk of his work for Democrats. He has been completely forthright about this in both his request for proposal and his interview. He has also, notably from my perspective as an independent, worked for Mayor Mike Bloomberg of New York, perhaps the best known independent in the country, and someone with the wherewithal to hire the best possible technical help. I'd also like to point out that Strategic Telemetry's public input manager, who will attend mapping hearings and focus on all public input issues, is a Republican and former Texan who served in the White House as Associate Director of Political Affairs for President George W. Bush, where she was, among other things, the primary political contact to grassroots folks in 8 states. Speaking of presidents, I must say the fact that Mr. Strasma played a key technical role in what has been widely viewed as the single most technically advanced presidential campaign in American history is not something I view as a negative. Since it's summer, I liken this kind of technical political work to playing Major League Baseball. In order to play at that level, you have to play in either the National or American League. Otherwise, you don't play at all. There are only two options. Also, to judge a best player, you look at his stats, not where he plays. Mr. Strasma has played in the majors with great distinction, in my opinion. I understand that reasonable people can differ on this selection, as Mr. Freeman and Mr. Sturts have, but I would encourage members of the public to watch the presentations from our Friday, June 24th meeting on our website at azredistricting.org and judge for yourselves. As has been noted, the role of a mapping consultant is a technical one. The consultant works solely at the discretion of the commission, period. If our experience thus far has shown anything, it is that this commission takes its role extremely seriously and is paying very close attention to the process at every step. If there is any perception by me or my fellow commissioners that maps are being drawn in a way that is counter to our expressed direction, or if the consultant is acting in anything beyond a technical capacity, we won't hesitate to let the consultant and the other commissioners know. This is not a shy group. As Mr. Strasma has said, it is inevitable that not everyone will be 100% happy with this or any similar commission's final plans, but with a highly skilled technical consultant and an open, transparent, and fully documented process, any dissatisfaction can at least be minimized. And to the extent that a member of the public feels dissatisfied with the maps, they will know the reasons for each decision and should not have any cause to question the fundamental soundness of the process. So we need to keep our eyes on the ball, which means complying with the constitutional requirements and the Voting Rights Act. Our goal is also to achieve pre-clearance with our maps on the first try and avoid the additional taxpayer expense and delay that would result from an objection. We've chosen the firm that we think has the best ability to help us achieve that outcome, and in my view, that choice was abundantly clear. Also, by choosing the firm with the least amount of direct prior in-state involvement, I believe we have a fresh start with minimal baggage related to anything that has happened here previously. As for our commission, I have great respect for Vice Chair Freeman, Vice Chair Herrera, Commissioner McNulty, and Commissioner Sturts, and I've enjoyed getting to know and working with each of them. They are an outstanding group of dedicated Arizonans who sometimes have principled and heartfelt differences. That is to be expected given the way the voters of Arizona and now our Constitution have designed this commission. Nevertheless, I will continue to strive for agreement and consensus, and I know we will continue to treat each other as we would like to be treated. Even though we come from varied backgrounds and perspectives, we all want to do the best possible job and serve the public in an honorable and open manner and leave a positive legacy for our great state. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments from commissioners?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Freeman?
I don't know if I'm on.
Oh.
There I'm on. Perhaps it's a question for council. In order to move forward, what's the next step that we need to take?
Madam Chair, Commissioner Freeman, I think that the motion was to direct Mr. Bladine to work with, negotiate a contract with Strategic Telemetry. I think that would be the next step, and we will begin that process.
So to be clear then, that there is no additional steps for this commission to take with respect to the retention of a mapping consultant.
That's correct.
Any other comments? Questions? Okay, hearing none, it's 4:20 p.m. Trying to find my agenda. It seems to just look at yours. Unless there's anything else to address on agenda item 3, I think we'll move on to agenda item 4. Discussion and possible action on presentation by the Arizona Competitive District Coalition. Ken Clark here?
Madam Chair, Commissioners, given the length of the deliberation you've just done, I imagine you're pretty tired. If you would like us to present tomorrow in Tucson, or, you know, would that help at all? You all seem pretty tired at this point.
I'm happy to proceed as anyone would like. Do you want to proceed with our meeting?
Madam Chair, how long is the presentation?
Under 20 minutes, Commissioner.
How does everyone feel? We're yeah, we're ready. Bring it on. Oh, I should get out of the way. Good idea. You have licorice. Pass it out. Yeah, that's a good point, actually.
I gotta turn off
I don't want to put my back to you. So. Let's see these. Yeah.
Madam Chair, Commissioners, thank you for allowing me the time to cover this important issue. Can you all hear me in the room? The Arizona Competitive Districts Coalition is something that was created with really two missions in mind. And it's grown a little bit since we've started, Ray. We really have two missions that are concurrent, I suppose you'd have to say. One is to educate the public in Arizona about the importance of competitive congressional legislative districts to the democratic process and protect Voting Rights Act districts at the same time, something we do not believe is mutually exclusive. And the second is to give interested individuals, groups, and partners the tools needed to communicate to the Redistricting Commission. Now, one of these mission statements is somewhat normative in that we have an agenda in that part of our role, and that is we believe that we could have created a greater number of competitive districts and that competitive districts are good for Arizona. The second part is, we believe, objective and more of the public service of what we're attempting to do. Right. Thank you. This is what drives us, and that is not to go in too much detail, but if you count up everybody who lives in a district, Republican or Democrat, in which that district is overwhelmingly gerrymandered for one party or the other, that's 660,000 registered voters. If you count up all the independents who live in districts where the independents are not likely to bridge the difference between the Democrats and the Republicans, that's 775,000 registered voters. All told, 46% of voters live in districts where their voice is not heard after the primary election. Now, obviously, we as a group believe you could have 10 out of 30 competitive districts and 4 out of 9 in Congress. We believe the numbers are there. It's just a question of whether the willpower is there to have that happen. If I could, before we, oh yes, the next slide, please. Ray, the next slide, please. Thank you. I want to address something that was brought up earlier and in last Friday as well, about competition. This is a quote from the Arizona Supreme Court ruling, Arizona Minority Coalition versus Independent Redistricting Commission in 2008. And I want to read this for you. The direction that competitiveness should be favored unless one of two conditions occurs, we added emphasis, does not, contrary to the Commission's assertion, mean that competitiveness goal is less mandatory than the other goals, can be ignored, or should be relegated to a secondary role. Next, please. In other words, in English, Competition is not first, as the plaintiffs wanted it to be. They wanted it to be higher up the list of 6 criteria, but it is certainly not last. So we believe that it is not mutually exclusive, that you can have a greater number of competitive districts while still attending to the desires of people to attend to their communities of interest. Next slide, please. The other part, our other hat that we wear, is that of public participation. Now, 10 years ago, we know that if you wanted to use Maptitude, if you wanted to have that level of sophistication and not just draw your district lines on the back of a napkin and submit it to the commission, you had to get the software. And that cost you $1,500 back then, and then you had another $1,000 worth of training. I just heard this today that if you wanted to contract for the multi-user version of Maptitude, that's a $10,000 bill. Our goal was to create something that was accessible to the public. Next, please. The only barrier now to entry is having a personal computer and having internet access. If you've got those 2 things, you can access what we've created called Redistrict Arizona and do your own mapping. You can share your ideas with other people. You can build coalitions. You can do that public participation that the last Department of Justice very clearly said they wanted. They said they wanted, quote, broad stakeholder support for different maps. And we believe that that's the best way to get through Department of Justice pre-clearance. Go ahead, Ray. So we created a contest, and the goal of the contest was to see who could do the best job of meeting all 6 of the redistricting criteria. Now, somebody earlier suggested that we have an agenda to put a map forward. It could not be further from the truth. Our goal is, in the contest, to put forward 2 of the best congressional maps that are submitted to us and 2 of the best legislative maps. We are not attempting to do the commission's job. Our goal was just to demonstrate, on our agenda side, demonstrate that we can create more competitive districts while protecting Voting Rights Act districts, but from the purpose of the public service side, to generate ideas, whether those ideas agree with us or not. I've spoken to groups that are to the left, and I've spoken to Tea Party groups, I've spoken to all kinds of folks, and said to them, use this as a platform to speak to the commission. Use this as a way to get your ideas across. We don't care whether you agree with us or not. We think that that participation is good. We've tried to demonstrate how the software works. We have a free webinar. If you go through our website, it's on YouTube, and you can watch it. It takes a little less than an hour. And we've had these things we've called mapathons, where we get people together in coffee shops, and we just try and use the system. Right now, there are over 450 profiles on our system where people have gone on, logged on, created a profile. And there are close to 900 maps where somebody has started doing some mapping. They may not have finished, but they've started doing that. And we think that's a huge step forward from where we were 10 years ago. And we also want to generate a public record so that we can demonstrate to the Department of Justice and hopefully get pre-clearance on the first time through that there were people who were very involved in the process and there was broad stakeholder support. Next, please. After the contest is over, we want to be a service to the IRC. We want to provide a platform and a medium for people to share ideas with the commission, help them build their communities of interest case, help them build the case for competition, help them support the Voting Rights Act district, geographic boundaries, compactness, whatever they think is the most important aspect. And in doing that, we will be watching the IRC and whatever decisions you make and your consultant makes regarding criteria that are used in the software, and we will want to mirror that. For instance, right now, we measure competitiveness, and you can see, by the way, all of our definitions are on our website. We measure competitiveness as an average of the performance of that census tract area in 2 previous elections averaged over the statewide races, okay? We couldn't use what was used 10 years ago because the same rules didn't seem to apply, and I won't try and go into too much detail, but basically the gentleman who was consulting with the commission 10 years ago, Michael McDonald from George Mason University, helped us put together this measure of competition. My point being, the commission here will adopt new definitions for these. How do you measure compactness? We will attempt to adopt those, and since the software is already out there and people are already using it, we will make it available so that they can put their ideas toward the commission. Now, I know that there were some mapping consultants who were talking about having a public participation component. Well, we never predicted that when we started this effort, but we're here for whoever wants to use it. If you want to have us work with that mapping consultant, that's what we're happy to do. Next, please. And that's it. So, if you all have any questions about what we're doing, I'm happy to answer them. Like I said, we're here. We want to be helpful to whatever direction you want to go.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I was just reminded of something. We were judging maps. The League of Women Voters, who is on our board, put together a panel of 3 judges, and they're the ones who are judging the maps based on the criteria that are listed on our website to see who does the best job of meeting all 6 criteria. I've not seen any of the maps specifically. I've helped the judges download them, but that's as far as I've gone. There are one Republican, 1 Independent, and 1 Democrat. I'm going to have to leave it at that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ken. I've been informed that we need to be out of this room by 5 p.m. I mean, completely out, right? So the next item on the agenda is the Executive Director's Report. I don't know, Mr. Bladine, if you wanted to cover any pieces of that. I'm not sure how long you were thinking it might take, but we could do that. Okay, sure. We can do it tomorrow. Okay.
That would be better for me because I know how long it takes to have it.
Oh, right. Yep. Good point. I think that's good. So maybe we table the rest of these items on the agenda 5 through 8 to tomorrow's meeting, and we'll cover them at that time so that we can give everybody time to dismantle this room.
Madam Chair, can
Yes,
you
Mr.
state the time and location of tomorrow's meeting?
I would be happy to, but I do not have that information on me. If anybody does and would like to announce it.
While I'm looking for that, Madam
Mr.
Chair,
Sturts?
we do have a speaker here that has had the opportunity, Marshall from the Open Nations.
Oh, yes. We have time for that. I'm sorry, Marshall, that's right. We did receive a request to speak form, and it's, if we could do that now, that would be great. His name's Marshall Naminga. He's from the Hopi tribe, representing the Hopi Tribal Council, and the subject is redistricting.
And Madam Chair, Marshall, before you begin, just for notification for tomorrow, that tomorrow's meeting starts at 1 o'clock, and it's at the Pima Community College District Office, which is at 4905 East Broadway, Building C, Room 105. It is essentially at Broadway and Swan in Tucson.
Thank you, Mr. Sturts. Mr. Naminga.
Madam Chair, members of the Commission, my name is Marshall Naminga. I'm here representing the Hopi tribe, in particular the Hopi Tribal Council. I'm here to listen and gather information and take it back and report to the Tribal Council. They ultimately will have the make the decision as to which districts we wish to be included in. Right now, we are actively seeking input from our people, and we hope to have all the information, and we will present it to the Commission soon, because we know time is short. So, thank you for allowing me to address you all. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
All right. I think that concludes our meeting for today. The rest of the items on the agenda that weren't covered will be covered tomorrow. And so, oh,
Madam Chair,
yes, I'm
do we
sorry,
need
Mr.
a
Green.
motion? I'll move that we table for tomorrow's hearing agenda items 5, 6,
Okay.
7, and 8.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you for that motion. We'll go ahead and plan on covering those items tomorrow. And it's at 4:35 in the afternoon. I declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you.